Uh, yes, you need to click on submit in order to. So on the daily participation, you'll have to click submit so that way the text box opens up. And today I just want to talk to you about checks and balances. So we already mentioned the three branches, of course, and what they do with the law. The legislative branch makes the law, executive branch enforces, and the judicial branch is the one that interprets. And each of these three branches, the founding fathers knew that it was possible for one of them to become more powerful than the other. When the Declaration of Independence was being written, they blamed the king for a lot of things, but actually it was Parliament that was responsible for most of the wrongdoings. And so they knew a tyrant couldn't just be one person, it could be a group of people. And so they built in all kinds of checks and balances to make sure that none of the branches could become more powerful. Probably the one with the most significant amount of power would be Congress in Article 1, which is the lengthiest of the three articles that set up the branches. And a lot of the power in Congress over one of the other branches actually goes to the United States Senate in particular. The United States Senate has a lot of power because they get to approve a variety of things that the president sets up. One of them would be treaties. Another would be the appointment of various officials, including ambassadors, people that represent us in other countries, cabinet secretaries, military officers, and a variety of other types of positions. So obviously the Senate has a lot of sway. And of course, one of the most significant ones that will be in the news the next few weeks, and we'll talk more about later, would be the appointment of federal judges, including Supreme Court justices. Those positions, of course, serve for life. So even after the president is out of office, those judges and justices are still going to be serving. So the Senate obviously has an important part to play to confirm or deny those nominees. And then, of course, Congress is the one in charge of the budget. And that's one thing a lot of people don't think about is all the money that is needed to enforce the law and pay the different people inside the different policing agencies under the executive branch comes from the legislative branch. And technically the pay and administrative costs of the court system also comes from the legislative branch. So the legislative branch has sway over the budget as well. And the budget, just like any law, has to be passed by a majority of Congress. They're the only ones that can introduce it technically. And they also have the ability to override any veto that comes from the president with 2/3 vote. Now, that's extremely difficult, but it is possible. And then, of course, the impeachment. The House of Representatives, if they feel that a federal judge or executive official, including the president, has committed a crime or done something unconstitutional, especially if it's something really serious like treason or bribery, which is listed, then they have the right in the House by a majority vote to impeach them. Now, impeach gets misunderstood a lot. It only means the president or the judge or whoever they're bringing up is charged with something. So it only means they're charged. Because then it has to go to the Senate, and the Senate has to have a 2/3 vote to actually convict the person and remove them from office. So there have been three presidents, that have been impeached in American history, but none of them have been convicted and removed. So impeachment does not mean the same thing as firing somebody. And of course, those three presidents are Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump. Richard Nixon actually left before they had the ability to impeach. Yes, there's a committee in the House that starts the process, and they actually voted to do it, but the entire House had not voted to impeach Richard Nixon yet. Then, of course, there's the executive branch. The president, of course, one of his biggest checks is the veto, because getting 2/3 of Congress to agree on anything is difficult. And so vetoes are rare, but even rarer would be an override of the veto. So the president has a lot of power by being able to say no. And of course, he also has the pocket veto, which means he just keeps it in his drawer for 10 days and it doesn't become law. That might be because it's something popular he disagrees with and doesn't want to actually veto. And then, of course, he is the one that actually gets to enforce the law. So Congress might have passed it, but really it's up to him and his people to take the first stage in order to implement those laws. And Congress does have oversight ability, which means they get to inspect and watch over the executive branch, but obviously they're not going to be able to keep track of all the different agencies and everything that they do. So the president has a lot of power in implementation of the law. And of course, the other check I also mentioned the fact that he has the ability to appoint the federal judiciary. And let's look at that last one, the judicial branch. That includes the federal district courts, which are in most major cities throughout the United States, over 90. They work just like a regular courtroom that involves either a lawsuit or a criminal case where you have a prosecutor and defense and a jury and one judge and everything like that. If the ruling is not agreed upon because maybe it's not constitutional, then it appealed to the courts of appeal. And there are over a dozen of those spread throughout the United States. Ours is in Philadelphia. And there, a panel of judges rehears the case information to decide if the ruling was constitutional, if it was legal. And then, of course, you have the right to appeal it a step further to the Supreme Court. And they can decide whether or not to toss out cases based on their legality or whether or not they are constitutional. And they have the ability to knock down laws that Congress passes as unconstitutional. And they have the ability to knock down executive orders that are unconstitutional as well. So this power is known as judicial review. And judicial review isn't technically listed in the Constitution. It's implied, though, because they're basically the last court of appeal in the United States. So those are the various types of checks and balances that exist between the three branches. So not one of them actually becomes more powerful. And we see they don't always work necessarily. Obviously, there are some flaws with the impeachment. If the president happens to control, or the president's political party is in control of Congress, it's less likely that that's going to happen. They're more likely to go along with whatever the president's doing, no matter what party they belong to. And then, of course, the court system takes a really long time, usually, for cases to work their way up through the system. So whether or not they're going to rule something constitutional takes, well, forever in the life of politics. So there are some flaws with it, but for the most part, it's worked throughout the last 2 centuries. Does anybody have any questions about the checks and balances? All right. So make sure that you